My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Thomas Houseman. It's October 23rd, 2025, and we're at Radiant Sparkling Wine in McMinnville. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today. And you know, we've spoken to you before, so we have some of your backstory. Let's catch up a little bit on what got you into wine to start with and what brought you to Oregon.
Well, what I love about these interviews, by the way, is I've watched a number of them, and I always love to hear people's stories. Mm-hmm. The thing that I've realized is that everybody's story is so unique and so different. It's like I thought there might be a pattern, but there isn't. I believe I might be the only modern dancer.
Probably the only modern dancer.
But there have been, so many fun stories. So yeah, I was a modern dancer in New York, and basically I was looking at my life at like 30, and I was like, I really want to walk the rest of my life and be mobile, but I want to be creative. And I made a list of things that I might be able to do. I was a home brewer, and I knew, I think the first thing that I knew, and I may have told you this the first time, is I would look out my window in New York, I would see this one tree in front of my one window there, and if it had leaves on it, it was summer, the leaves were yellow, it was fall, if there were no leaves, it was winter. And that was my connection with nature. So I knew I wanted to be creative, and I knew I wanted to be more connected to nature than I was in New York. I was longing for that. And lo and behold, went back to school, ended up getting, I'm making this really short, ended up getting a degree in enology, and I am still being creative, and I love the seasons. I love being connected to nature, and that's kind of the beauty of what happened. Is I went from being inside of a studio all the time, inside of a subway, inside of a theater, always wearing black. I think I almost still do that, but now I'm connected to nature.
And how did you come to Oregon?
I came to Oregon via New Zealand. I was in New Zealand. I was trying to stay in New Zealand and renew my visa. And at the time, there was an open, well, there's that really like big connection between Oregon and New Zealand. And I'd never been to Oregon. I'd never really heard about Oregon. And this is 2003. So I think that's an important date. Ponzi they just lost an assistant winemaker. They needed somebody to get them through harvest. I needed to get back to New Zealand, but I needed to leave the country and come back. Mm-hmm. So I said, I'll come work for you for harvest, and you get an assistant winemaker at an intern price, and if we like each other, we can talk. Mm-hmm. And I had no intention of staying. And lo and behold, I fell in love with Oregon, and I've been here since 2003. So there's that. Well, except for the time in Michigan, which we're going to talk about soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So last time we spoke, you were at Anne Amie. Tell me a little bit about kind of the work you were doing there, and how your time at Anne Amie went.
Well, I loved Anne Amie. To be an estate winemaker. They hired me there in 2007 when they were essentially rebranding. And they were like, you make the wines that you love and that you want to make, and we will basically brand around that. So I had an opportunity to come into an established winery and make all sorts of things that you wouldn't necessarily get to do, because usually you follow in somebody else's shoes. You have to kind of adapt somewhat to their style and the brand. And I came in and we planted a whole bunch of vineyards and started making some really fun stuff. I mean, I think I was the first or one of the first people in the valley to make Pinot Gris Rosé. And barrel-aged Pinot Blanc and effervescent sparkling kind of that modeled Vino Verde. I mean, a lot of really great stuff. And was able to plant the vineyards to grow those things and be an estate winemaker. So I had a great time at Anne Amie until COVID, and then everything changed.
Before we talk about COVID, before the interview, you were talking about kind of your initial introduction to Radiant. So tell us about your initial foray into sparkling wine.
Okay, well that one, so when I was talking about when I started Anne Amie, there were two things at Anne Amie that were a hard sale for the ownership. One of them was planting Gamay. And they could not wrap their head around why I would want to grow something that wasn't Pinot that we would sell for less money than Pinot. It would take up the same space as Pinot. And I was like, but Gamay is delicious, and people are going into tasting rooms, and they want something that isn't Pinot, because they get, sometimes you get Pinot'd out. So that was one. The other was sparkling wine. And it took me a long time to sell them on sparkling wine. And I think the biggest thing was, I was trying to explain that we had some vineyards that were very cool. And every year they were going into subpar blends for Pinot Noir. And I was like, we have a perfect sparkling wine site. Let's make the wines from this site that they want to be. And after 4 years of listening to me, they finally are like, okay, we'll let you make it. And it was coincidentally 2011. So if there was not a better year to start making sparkling in Oregon, it was 2011, which was a total coincidence. So in 2011, made the first sparkling. Radiant did not exist yet. So we had a plan we made it here. We found a place that we could bottle it here. It was going to go down to Rack and Riddle in California, and then come back here, which is a lot of moving around of wine just to make it. And the time that we were in Tirage, waiting for that wine to get ready to go down to California, Radiant started. And we were one of the first clients, and I've been a part of Radiant in one form or another ever since. So that's 2013.
So you talked about COVID changing everything as it did for obviously so many people, so many businesses. Tell me about your COVID experience and how how that time was for you.
Well, for me, I have two COVID experiences. So first of all, COVID started and I was at Anne Amie. And one day I was in my office and people were walking through the winery. And this is the beginning of COVID. This isn't the part of COVID when we didn't see anybody, we were spaced apart, we were all wearing masks, we didn't know what was going on, there was no food in the supermarkets. Like, you were afraid to go shopping at the supermarket because you didn't know what was going to happen. You see on television people dying, and there's a group of people walking through the winery without masks. And I was like, what the hell is going on? I was just like, I don't know these people, I don't know. And so basically, to kind of make this story a little shorter, is through that, it happened a couple times, I realized that the winery was for sale. So for me, I was like, okay, it's COVID, the winery is for sale, I might be out of a job, what am I going to do, right? People aren't hiring during COVID. So I started looking around for other employment. And I ended up getting a job in Michigan. It was like that's like the short version.
You can tell the longer version if you want to. I'll listen to the longer version.
Okay. Well, basically, I had gone to Michigan several times. I'm not from the Midwest, so I think that's the biggest thing to remember. Like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, you went back to where you're from." I was like, "No, I never lived there. I don't necessarily like snow. I knew nothing about Michigan, but I had been there on sales trips, and I really liked the town of Traverse City, and I liked the wines that were from there. I'd gone to the what was the name of the event? The International Wine, I'll get it at some point. It's a Riesling symposium that happens in Michigan. And so I tasted the Rieslings from there, and they were amazing. I mean, really beautiful wines. I hadn't had many of the other wines, but the Rieslings were solid. And so I'd seen this ad for a winemaker in Michigan. I talked to a friend that I had there, and I said, what's this winery like? And he's like, it's modern. They're making all vinifera varietals. I went to the website. They're making Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, Riesling. Basically, everything that I was making already at Anne Amie. And they were making bubbles. And about 50% of what they were making was sparkling. So for me, I was like, okay, it's 2020. I've been making sparkling since 2011. But I've never done the entire process. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important thing that is really apparent about Radiant is that, all along I'd been making the base wine. I'd been sitting down with Andrew, who started this, and we'd been tasting dosage together. But all the hard stuff that happens, the really hard stuff, just magically happened in the background. I didn't do it. Like, I didn't riddle, I didn't disgorge, I didn't do any of the things that are, that are difficult. But I magically made sparkling wine for all those years from beginning to end. So here's this opportunity. I went out, I looked at the winery, I met the team, all during COVID, which was the weirdest experience ever, flying during COVID. And then I realized, here's an opportunity for me to connect the dots and make sparkling wine from beginning to end, because they did everything there. So I loaded up everything I had. I moved to Michigan in the middle of COVID. And I had a really wonderful COVID experience. In the middle of nowhere, I ended up getting a very small friend group. I was still working, I was making wine, I was learning something new. And it was just a very, I was hiking every day. It was to be in the middle of nowhere during COVID was, in a beautiful place, was wonderful. And I left in July of 2020. So I missed out on the 2020 debacle harvest that happened here, and had a really great harvest in 2020. So I feel like I kind of slayed it. Winery not for sale, had a great experience, learned how to make sparkling wine, and didn't have the smoke taint harvest that I would have had. And I was in contact with people here and I felt for them, but it was, I can't imagine a weirder harvest to have fires and to have COVID at the same time. And to be on the outside of that was really strange, right? After so many years here in the Willamette Valley.
So you mentioned one of the things that drew you was making vinifera varietals versus obviously not necessarily a common thing in that part of the world. Tell me about making wine in Michigan. What's it like? How is it different?
I think that for me, Michigan in a lot of ways is, if I were to make an analogy, it's like Oregon in the 80s. Right? It's a very small, very tight-knit community. There are dozens of wineries instead of hundreds of wineries. And they have not achieved that momentum to move things forward. They're selling all of their wines. They're selling them out of the tasting room. They're selling out, so they don't really distribute. So there's, unlike here where we have to think about distribution channels and are we, selling internationally and how are we selling around the United States, everything gets gobbled up there. Traverse City, I went there not knowing a lot about Traverse City, but it's it is a captive audience. Mm-hmm. You have this place that looks like the Caribbean in the middle of the Midwest. So you get Cleveland, you get Cincinnati, you get Detroit, you get Indianapolis, you get Chicago. You get all of these people congregating in this one space, and they get there and they have nothing else to do, so they go to the wineries and they just buy everything. Right? And it was just I just watched this happen during COVID, right? When we're all spaced and you can only get so many people in a building, and then we have people outside, and I was just the sales were incredible. And the varieties are good. I think the really interesting thing about where I was on the Old Mission Peninsula, which sticks out into Lake Michigan, and it's 18 miles long and 2 miles wide at its farthest. There's a bay on one side that's 600 feet deep and a bay on the other side that's 800 feet deep. So this little bit of land is completely insulated by all the water around it. So it doesn't get nearly as cold in the winter. It doesn't get nearly as hot in the summer. And so we're growing the same things we're growing here. They just grow differently. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different environment for growing them. I learned a lot about viticulture. And I learned a lot about the things that I had kind of, in my head I thought I'd figured out about growing and making wine. And it was a revelation. And it's changed me as a winemaker. I'm a much more thoughtful winemaker because I left. And I learned a lot about sparkling wine. And I'm thankful for things like these gyro pallets behind me, which do the work instead of having to do everything by hand. So yes, I love machines.
Well, I have many questions about sparkling wine, but I want to start with, it's a very interesting point you made about you learned a lot and it made you a more thoughtful winemaker. Give me an idea, give me an example of some of the lessons you learned. What was different about growing grapes there? What did you have to relearn?
Well, I think that, essentially Oregon, well, first of all, I want to say that Oregon, the Oregon that I moved here to in 2003, in so many ways is not the Oregon that we're looking at in 2025. The climate has changed drastically. Just looking at the time that when I was picking, when I first started making wine, to when I see people picking now, the heat units, the amount of days that are 90 degrees and above, the farming has changed, but a lot of things have stayed the same. But I think some of the constants are that, we have the Van Duzer corridor. And that's the biggest thing that I see that kind of keeps things somewhat constant, is that we get a really great diurnal swing from that. In the Midwest, there is no Van Duzer corridor. You're in the center of a continent. You have these huge lakes that are holding heat or cooling, depending on what time of year it is, but you don't have a diurnal swing. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at the way grapes metabolize, or vines metabolize nutrients, and how grapes ripen, and you're looking at the numbers and you're kind of making decisions, because we don't have that huge diurnal swing, there's a very different chemistry. And because I think the growing season is shorter and you're having warmer nights, you see that the whole time frame for things ripening shortens. The thing that is constant, I think, is that here we have a wall of rain that determines when things stop. There they have a wall of frost that determines when things stop. So at some point you look at the weather and you know that it's not going to get any warmer. The difference is that window is a lot later there, but you're starting later. So and it's sandy soil. I mean, there's so many things that are different. Sandy soil, it's kind of more like France, where you have rain throughout the summer. We don't get a whole lot of rain. But it made me think a lot about the things, I'd been working on an estate for so long, and so I'd gotten very tuned into what those grapes needed, and I had to relearn all of the clues on picking and tasting, and listen to what other people had to say that are there, and some of it was really great advice. Other things needed to be thrown away. Like when I first went there, they were like, it's too cold to do native ferments. You have to inoculate everything. And I said, well, I've done native ferments my entire career. I'm going to play with it. I'll do one lot, and if I need to inoculate, I will. I didn't inoculate anything. So that had just been something that, that they had held on to forever, which is not necessarily the case anymore. People are not inoculating there. But somebody had to be the first lemming off the cliff. Why not the Oregonian, right?
So small industry, tell me about finding your people there, especially in the middle of the pandemic. Tell me about kind of finding your community there and starting to be part of the wine scene there.
Well, I'd already had people that I'd known from going up there for this Riesling event that I cannot remember the name of for the life of me. So I had known people from that, and I had also, some of them had come down to the Alsace Festival in the Anderson Valley, and I had met them there before too. So I kind of had a little bit of a toe into the community. But I ended up basically, I think like many people during COVID we were all like little castles. We had fortified the castle, and we worked in our castles, and we did what we needed to do, and we didn't really communicate. So I had a couple of really close friends that I would, do things with, or we go hiking and do the kinds of things you could do outside that was safe. But it wasn't until after kind of a lot of the COVID restrictions ended that we started getting together and kind of interacting and talking. The thing that I did keep consistent even through COVID is I had been moderating for the technical symposium for the world of Pinot Noir. And I've probably done it for like 15 years now. And so that technical symposium was kind of an offshoot of Steamboat, which I'm sure you've talked about ad nauseum on these interviews. But I had been leading that forever, and it was an opportunity for everybody to come together as winemakers and talk. So I didn't want to lose that momentum during COVID. So one of the things that we did do during COVID is for 2 years, we did it remotely. So we would set up these video screens, we would have all the samples come together, and we would basically taste these wines, everybody in their own. So we had a pod in Sonoma, we had a pod in Central California, we had a pod in Michigan, we had a pod in Oregon, and we would all basically taste together remotely in the same room because I didn't want to lose this sense of community. So what I brought to Michigan while I was there was they now were able to bring their wines to the rest of the world because the rest of the world had not tasted their wines. So I think that's the biggest thing. The other thing that I had been doing at Anne Amie is I had been doing a sparkling base wine symposium. I think I started that in 2014. And so it was an opportunity for us in Oregon because we were new. Radiant started in 2013. 2014 we started tasting base wines together. There was just a small group of us in this room tasting, and we were learning from each other because sparkling takes so long from beginning to end that if you don't taste each other's wines, it's like turning a cruise ship around, right? Like you can do it, but it's going to take a long time to get there. So if you make a mistake and you don't taste it till 3 or 4 years later when you disgorge, then you correct it. It's another 3 to 4 years before you get to taste that. It's 8 years for you to just kind of correct that course. So the whole idea of tasting together was something that I started, and we've been doing it ever since. And we started doing one of those. We ended the one here because I was gone, but we started doing it in Michigan. And so now I'm doing a sparkling symposium tasting for the world of Pinot Noir, for Oregon, and for Michigan every single year. So what I did while I was there, I think, is bring them into the larger winemaking community and let other people taste their wines, but also start that little tiny kind of nucleus for a very nascent sparkling wine community and have them get together and start talking to make better wines. So what I've done, and I feel like, in my sparkling career, is now I'm talking to people outside of the region so that when I come and talk to people here, I have and this is what I was saying when I came back, I have a very different perspective on Oregon winemaking than if I hadn't gone to Michigan and experienced it differently. But I also, because I sit down every single year and I taste with other winemakers in other regions and taste their sparkling and taste their still wines, I feel like I have a perspective on Oregon wine that I wouldn't have otherwise, just being an estate winemaker in Oregon. And I love that. Like, that's huge for me.
So Michigan, I'm curious about, obviously we're in a place that is wine country and is so well known for being wine country. In a place like that's much more regional and much different audience. Tell me about sort of the attitudes around wine there, about the qualities of the wine, and about sort of how they fit in the larger wine scene.
Yeah, I think that Michigan is its own worst enemy. And I say that only because they can sell every single thing they make every year without distribution. So what ends up happening is, if you can do that and you don't care, you don't have to care, right? And I think that's the thing that I wanted to do when I came in is help say, look, you're selling everything out. You don't have to dilute the wines that you're making to make them commercially viable. You are a small winery or a small region, make great wines, they're still going to sell, right? And care about it. And I think that's the hard part for me when I was there. And I think that was one of the things that ate away at me while I was there, was that I truly cared, and I was having to fight the fight with ownership quite a bit of why it was important to take the extra steps in the vineyard in the wines and not like some of the wineries there bring in fruit from, like, why make Pinot Gris here when we can get cheap Pinot Gris from Washington and put it in a bottle and people are still going to drink it? I was like, well, if you're trying to, on one hand, say that we're an amazing wine region and you should drink our wines and we matter, and on the other hand, you're saying, let's bring this in because it's cheaper and we can sell the hell out of it and nobody cares, you're now telling two different stories. And you need to figure out what your story is and tell it. And so I was fighting that fight the entire time I was there. And I feel like, there have been some other people there that are really pushing for that same thing. And they live there and they're a part of the wine community and they're doing a great job. And I feel like it's going to happen. But I think that's the biggest thing that I noticed. And to your question, I mean, it's hard. It's hard for people if they're like, well, if I don't have to, why should I? Thank goodness there are way less frosé machines in Oregon wineries than in Michigan wineries.
That's good. I like that. Obviously, you mentioned one of the big draws was sparkling wine, and not just sparkling wine, but like you say, the whole process of sparkling wine. So tell me about your first experience diving deeper into the sparkling wine making. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to 11, right? I love sparkling wine, and I've always loved things with bubbles. I think when I started out talking about Anne Amie, one of the things that I was trying to do there was create a Vinho Verde wine. Because I had gone to Portugal, I'd fallen in love with Vinho Verde. I was like, how can you get, and I may have talked about this in last time, how can you get a wine on tap that, like, you go in there, you have wine on tap, it goes into this, carafe, and it's like $5 and it tastes delicious and goes well with everything, right? Why does wine have to be pretentious? Why can't it just be delicious and approachable? Like, we're constantly fighting that battle. Like, people will go into breweries and they'll ask, they're like, oh, is it an IPA? Is it dry hopped? Is it juicy? Is it a New England? Is it hazy? Like, they come in and they ask all sorts of questions. They're engaged and they'll be asking about IBUs, and they come into a winery and they're just intimidated. And it shouldn't be that way. How can you be that engaged in a brewery and this intimidated by wine? So it was like when I saw Vinho Verde, I was like, I had a Vinho Verde moment, right? I was like, here's a wine, right? If we can grow this and make this and put bubbles in it, it's delicious, and and people are just, it's approachable. Wonderful. We now have drawn people in. So that's where it started for me, was making Amrita. And then, I started falling in love more and more with bubbles. And in 2011, when I was able to start making sparkling wine, I went down to Napa right before harvest. And I went to Frank Family, I went to Schramsberg, and I went to Domaine Carneros. And every single place that I went to, it's right before harvest. In fact, Domaine Carneros was bringing in fruit. And everybody welcomed me with open arms and, talked to me, because I didn't have really this community to talk to here. And they explained to me what they were doing, how they were doing it. And I went to Frank Family, and the winemaker took this file he had that was a translation from a French manual, and he went to the photocopier, and it was 80 pages. And he photocopied it and gave it to me, and he goes, this is going to help you out. And for me, it was like, I have just found a new community, right? All of a sudden, I'd gone from doing all these things to realizing that this larger community of sparkling wine, that they cared. And it wasn't that Soder didn't care and Argyle didn't care. They were just making as much wine as they could, and they didn't have the time or the space to help me out. They were there for me if I had questions, but they couldn't help me make those wines. So yeah, and I think for me, I'm gonna go back to dance really quickly, is when I was dancing, there were the people, we're getting ready, things are gonna move maybe. Let's see which ones they are. Sorry, that beep are the gyro cages behind me. So it's just warning, yeah, we're moving. So it's just warning me that things are riddling behind me. So the bottles are moving,
and the yeast is moving. So it's an extra added benefit. That, and there's a train going by. We get it all at once. Anyway, what I was talking about dance. So I started dancing as an athlete in college, and it was an easy transition for me. But a lot of the people that I danced with, the females, had been dancing since they were like 7 or maybe younger. And so for me, as a 20-year-old, getting into dance, it's kind of like that reduced growing period I was talking about in Michigan. Everything was condensed. For the women that had been dancing since they were like babies, like by the time they got to the where I was, they were often really bored with what they were doing. So they were looking for more challenges. So there's a company, a modern dance company called Merce Cunningham. And he's a modern dancer. Basically what he did is he kind of reinvented dance by taking it and cutting it. What he would often do is cut up phrases, put them in a hat, shake it up, give it to the dancers, and they would have to do these things that they learned out of sequence. And so the dancers that had been dancing all their lives, this kind of mental math that they would be able, like, it now challenged them in a way that ballet didn't. Ballet was formulaic. So I'm going to tie these things together, I promise. So for me, having made wine all of these years, coming into sparkling wine was like these dancers that had pieces cut up and had to learn them. I now had to relearn so many things that I had thought I knew about winemaking. And what I love about sparkling wine is it's challenging in a way that still winemaking isn't. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about still winemaking. I'm just saying there are a lot more variables and you can't hide behind anything. Like every tiny little decision counts, because the carbonation in the bubbles, if there are any flaws, it takes it straight to your nose. And the picking window for sparkling wine is so short. If you miss a picking window for still wine and you can kind of you're like, I was close. It's fine. You have time in barrel. There are a lot of things you can do. If you miss the chemistry in sparkling wine, you've missed it. And it's often just a couple of days. And it's often around Labor Day. So you're like, I kind of want to give my crew one last weekend before harvest. And then you've often missed it. So there's that. And then there's, when you're pressing, the press decisions are so important. If you press too hard and you get phenolics, those phenolics are there. The bubbles bring them out. It's so much more transparent. So for me as a winemaker, what I love about this transition to sparkling is it constantly challenges me. And I have to think about it so hard. And I think about those dancers that I didn't understand, because I didn't understand, why would you ever want to do that? Why would you, another thing that Merce Cunningham would do is during the dance, he would turn the lights out. And the dancers would have to continue dancing in the dark, and then the lights would come back on and they hadn't lost step, they were still in time, they were still dancing together. It's those kind of challenges are what sparkling wine is. It's like turning the lights out and cutting it up and giving it back to you in different sequence. And I love it.
What was the experience like in Michigan as you were diving into having the whole process in front of you?
Well, I feel like, here's the thing I have to also answer that with, is I was an estate winemaker in Michigan. Mm-hmm. So, I had some grapes that were off the estate, but they were all from a very focused point. And for me with sparkling wine, I think it was the same thing. I just had to be really aware about what that picking window was like. But since I was there on site and I could walk out and taste the grapes, it wasn't too different. The thing that was different was the way the chemistry looked. And this is one of the things I was saying earlier about the Van Duzer corridor, is it gives us a very different chemistry here than I see in anywhere else that I taste sparkling wines and wines in general. So I had to be able to say, okay, the numbers that I'm used to seeing and used to picking are not the numbers I'm getting here. So what does this taste like? And I had to rely a little bit more on how do things taste and not are these the specific numbers I'm looking for harvesting. And I think a perfect example of that is this year, 2025. And when you interview winemakers about the 2025 harvest, you're going to hear the chemistry was very different than it's been in the past. So you had to trust your knowledge of what you're used to seeing, but you also had to kind of take this leap of faith and saying, these aren't the numbers I'm used to seeing, but I know what I don't want, but I know what I do want. And I think, if you were waiting around this year for flavor, you probably, especially for sparkling wine, picked too ripe, and now you have to worry about alcohol. And with sparkling wine in general, if you get too much alcohol in your base wine, then you add the sugar to it to do your secondary fermentation, and you're creating an environment inside the bottle where the secondary fermentation doesn't want to happen. And when you have too much alcohol in sparkling wine, it tends to do all sorts of things to the palate that you don't like. So this year, I think chemistry was a little odd here.
Interesting. So, what brought you back to Oregon?
I think the easiest way is that, for me to say this, is that I was at a place where I was starting to think about, I don't have kids. And many people, when they start thinking about their legacy, they're like, legacy is a horrible word, by the way. I hate the word legacy. But they think about what are my children going to, what am I going to leave to my children? And I don't have that. And for me, I've already talked about what I have is what I'm doing in the industry. And I feel like I'm very involved in sitting down and talking with other winemakers about winemaking and taking the experience I have and help bringing people together, not telling them how to do things. I'm not a consultant in a way, but listening to them and putting people together so that as we talk together, people are learning from others. So the reason that I've continued doing the World of Pinot Noir Technical Symposium, I do the one in Michigan, I do the one here, I have a couple of others that I do, is that I feel like what I'm doing with my life is building bridges and getting people to talk to each other and making better wines because of it. Oregon is Oregon because of what we've done in the past to be a community where we talk to each other, we share information, and we make better wines because of it. And I think that that's uniquely Oregon. Other places are doing it, but not to the level that we have had to do it in order to be brand Oregon. So for me, I was in this situation, I was in Michigan, and I started thinking about once again, it was kind of like that moment when I left dance. It's like, what am I doing with my career? We only have so many opportunities to have vintages. And so I started thinking about how am I going to best leave a mark somehow. And this opportunity at Radiant came up. And so I had an opportunity now to, instead of making wine on one site and making my wines and people like them and people fall in love with them and you have an audience, is to come back and do what I've done all along and work with 40 or 50 different people, sit down with them, people I know, people I respect, talk about wine, make better wines. And so when the opportunity that Andrew offered me to come back and become general manager at Radiant, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to sit down with all these people and talk about wine. And if they want to talk about it and they want help or if they want guidance or if they don't, I'm still involved in it. And I've never managed a bunch of people. I've never interacted with a lot of people. Andrew took a huge chance that I was going to fail miserably. And I told him that. I'm like, you know what? I've been a winemaker. I've had a crew of 3 or 4. I've never had to interact with all these people, and this is a very different world for me. So I give him a lot of credit for having faith that I could do this.
Tell me about the initial role, general manager of this, as you understood it, and how sort of the first year. Tell me how the first few months, the first year on the job. What were the learning curves? What were the exciting points?
Okay, I came back to Radiant in February of 2023, I want to say. So basically, coming in, Radiant's busy season is from February until July. So it's kind of like starting a restaurant job in a restaurant you've never been in and arriving at like 3:30 when you know that dinner rush is at 5. So my first season here was like a really bad restaurant stress stream where orders just kept coming up and I felt like I was running constantly. I knew everything that I was doing. I knew how to do it. I mean, a lot of my job is building yeast cultures, making sure that the yeast cultures are happy. I've made yeast cultures my entire life, doing microscopy. But at the same time that we're building these cultures, we're doing these things, we're also disgorging these wines that are coming in and getting riddled, like the wines behind me, we're disgorging them. So basically it's like, okay, you're juggling and then somebody throws you a fish. And so now you've got something slippery that's there and then somebody throws you a chainsaw and a fish. And so, you know, you've got something slippery, you've got something that's gonna cut your arm off, and this was my first season at Radiant was trying to do all those things at once and learning it. And I did it. And thank God that Andrew was still involved with Radiant at that time. And so I had somebody to reach out to, and I have an amazing, amazing crew that they were just like, okay, new guy. We've been doing this forever. They had my back. And so it wasn't horrible. But the funny thing was, having come back the second year and doing that same thing, it was a very different pace than it was the first year. But I got through it, and I learned a lot, and I had fun, and I'm still here. So all of those things are good. Yeah. And I brought back the Oregon Sparkling Wine Symposium. So that was one of the first things I did, is like, let's sit down, let's start talking again as a group. And the big thing for me was that very first year in 2014, when we just had that nascent group of winemakers, is now we have a room full of, I think we had 80, 85 people here. And we ran out of space. Like, I had to limit it. So, I mean, the community in that amount of time for what we're doing in making sparkling wine in Oregon is completely different. We have other people making sparkling wine in other facilities, and the knowledge base, what people are doing, what they're experimenting with, how that discussion is, like, all of that to me is indicative of what has happened because of this facility here in the last little over a decade. It's pretty amazing. I mean, we look at the press for sparkling wine, you know, in Oregon, and so much of that is because of this facility being built and enabling people to make wine, which they haven't done before. And I think that's the biggest thing, like going back to your questions before about kind of like looking at other regions and why they're doing things differently or they don't have the momentum we have, is because these little things like Radiant, this nucleus for making sparkling wine, changed the direction of sparkling wine in Oregon. Mm-hmm. There is no Radiant in northern Michigan. There is no Radiant that I know of on the Central Coast in California. Not that those regions can't make viable, wonderful wines. They can, they do. But this is what changed the direction. We had great sparkling wine being made here for decades. But all the people that wanted to make sparkling wine that weren't Argyle or Soder couldn't afford the machinery to do it, and we didn't have the momentum for that to happen, and we now have it.
So give me an idea of Radiant's role. What do you do? What do you not do? What is your part of the sparkling winemaking process for people?
Okay, I said that Radiant does all the hard stuff, which is correct. I could sum it up. Radiant does all the hard stuff. Next question. So basically what happens is the winery does really important things. They make the picking call. The most important thing for making sparkling wine is the picking call. They make the press call. The second most important thing, in my opinion, for sparkling wine. So they have now made really great base wine, hopefully. Radiant basically comes in with a mobile bottling line. Before we do that, we go and we pick up their base wine, bring it back here, build up a nice clean culture. We do a cell count, make sure that the cells are happy, healthy, delivering the right amount of cells to get the job done, but not too much. We go back the day of, the winery has put sugar in the tank, they've warmed it up, everything's happy, everything's, it's like the little jacuzzis ready to go. We put the yeast in, we bottle it, it goes into tirage bins, and then it disappears into a warehouse for however long. Year, 2 years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever you want. So then they reach out to Radiant the winery reaches out to Radiant when they're ready to disgorge. We can set up a dosage trial, sit down and taste together, which I think is always wonderful. I think it's great to have somebody lead a dosage trial that is not involved in it. So you can just taste blindly and pick the wine that you like. That isn't necessarily the case. A lot of the wineries now have been doing this long enough that they're happy doing that by themselves. We still have clients that taste with us. Then basically all the things arrive here. The wine that's been sitting on tirage, the packaging, all that arrives at Radiant. The bottles go into these gyro cages behind me for about a week. And then we disgorge, we pop everything, we put the label on, put it in a box, gets shipped out of here, and then a winery magically has labeled wine. So really, most of our clients have to make really good base wine and then ship it to us. So we do the rest of it. We make sure that we have a good solid culture that does the secondary fermentation, and then we do all the finishing. So once again, I could have just left it with, we do the hard stuff.
You said you hadn't ever had the job of managing that many different kinds of people, that many different personalities. Tell me about that. Tell me about your role in the middle of 40 to 50 different winemakers, winemaking brands, each with their own ideas and their own thoughts. What's your role there, and how does it play out?
Well, I luckily have a great role model. Andrew Davis is one of the nicest people I've ever met. I was telling you before this interview that people for years have been telling me about Ted Lasso, right? And I have just been dismissing it because I hate people telling me what I need to watch. Like, you tell me what I'm going to need to do, and I become the guy that doesn't do it. Like, I steadfastly am like, I'm not eating that, right? Just the little choo-choo train can come, I'm not going to eat it. So, haven't watched Ted Lasso. Andrew Davis is the most Ted Lasso person that I've met outside of Ted Lasso. So for me in my head, as I'm dealing with these clients who I've never, as an introvert, I really, at any point in my life, if I cannot deal with people, I will take the opportunity to not deal with people. Andrew is not that person. Andrew is like a golden retriever. He just always wants to be scratched, and he's wagging his tail, and he's never in a bad mood. So basically, when I interact with my clients, I'm like, what would Andrew / Ted Lasso do, right? So when I have this instinct to retreat, I have to think in my head, it's like, okay, it's not me, it's Radiant Sparkling Wine, it's Andrew's dynasty, don't mess it up by being you. So I try to do that on every opportunity I have. But I also try to, like, in the other part of me is the education part. So I'm always there. Like, I always put it out there. If you need anything, like, just reach out. If you want to talk about it, you want to taste it, I'll come taste. If you don't, fine. If you just want to ship me things, I'll do it. So for me, I think the biggest thing is learning how to not be me in the way that like I said, about retreating, but also listening to the needs, the different needs, and responding to the different needs of all these clients, because every single client is different. And how they make wine and how they interact and how they communicate or they don't communicate. Like, that's the thing you learn about a lot of people is like, wow, I'm not such a bad communicator after all. There are a lot worse communicators than me. Yeah. And those, they're all part of our client base. Some of them are great, some of them aren't so great. Some of them are great winemakers and bad communicators. I don't know. Ted Lasso.
That was a big surprise for me too, in getting into this industry. Communication all over the place.
Well, and I've also learned, it's interesting to me is that there's like a timeline. It's like like when they have these volcanic eruptions and there's like a layer of ash where they're like, well, after this layer of ash, like, things are very different. I feel like communicating, there is a timeline for people that are like, oh, I only communicate via text. Right? There's an age difference where it's like email, text only. And you have to learn, like, how people communicate. And there's so many ways to communicate. You're like, okay, did they email me? Did they text me? Did they call me? Did they Facebook Messenger me? So I spend a lot of time just like going through and trying to figure out where the hell the message is from the people that send messages.
Sounds like you're inside my head right now. Yeah. This all sounds very familiar. Yeah. I love that. You talked about the growth just in terms of number of people making sparkling wine, obviously in large part due to Radiant. Tell me about the evolution of sparkling wine in Oregon itself. How has the wine quality changed? Where will it go next?
Well, let's just say it's gotten exponentially better. And that's not to say that people were making bad sparkling wine. I think that we're learning from it's like anybody else. We're learning from our sites. We're learning from our mistakes. We're learning from others. And I think the biggest thing I'm seeing is people are starting to experiment more with not just making, like, some people are now making non-vintage wines with reserve wines. Some people are now, they've planted other varieties that are in there as well. We're seeing Blanc de Blancs, we're seeing Blanc de Noirs. It isn't just, I think when we first started there were a lot of brutes, whereas like we would mix Chardonnay and Pinot together and like it was easy. And I see people taking more chances. That's the biggest thing. But I think that this leads to a question you haven't asked, and I'm going to jump forward maybe to that, is how are we responding sparkling wine making wise to a very changing Oregon? And I think that's the hardest thing that I'm seeing, is that in the 20-something years that I've been making wine in Oregon, that the climate has changed so fast. And where does sparkling wine fit into that? And I think so many wineries have sparkling wine built into the sites that they're currently farming. And as those sites get warmer, and the varieties and clones that we have planted, I think it's going to get harder for people to, like, sparkling wine's going to get pushed farther forward. Like when I was in Domaine Carneros that year in 11, I think I was there in August, like the middle of August, right? And they were already picking. And I thought, we'll never see that here. We were picking in August this year for sparkling wine. And so that's the thing for me, is like, where do we need to really start thinking about sparkling wine? And is there is there going to be a sparkling wine vineyard site like you see these sites in other regions? And we had, like when I first started here, like Shea was such a big name. It's a very warm site. But is there a sparkling wine Shea vineyard? Do we need to be, like the big thing for me when I see California right now is that one of the AVAs that didn't really exist for, it was just too cold, too windy, was the Petaluma Gap AVA. And now so many wonderful wines are coming from the Petaluma Gap. We have a Petaluma Gap. It's called the Van Duzer Corridor. So I think that what I see is that we need to be thinking about the Van Duzer Corridor and these areas that are farther out in the Van Duzer Corridor as this place that maybe, sparkling wine in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we need to start thinking about vineyards there. The Grand Ronde Valley, right? That area. When you start driving from McMinnville, by the time you get to the other end of the Grand Ronde Valley, I look at my thermometer in my car, and it's often between 5 to 10 degrees cooler, plus a big diurnal swing. So if you're looking at something that you're counting on for acidity, I think that we as an industry need to start thinking about, especially for sparkling wine, these sites that are going to be viable sparkling wine sites in 20 years. And I feel like it's going to get harder and harder for us as sparkling wine producers to continuously make great sparkling wines in the sites that we currently have, with the clones that we currently have, with the farming that we currently have. I think we could do it for a while, changing the farming practices, but I think that a lot of these sites are going to eventually not make the sparkling wine that we really want to be making. That I think that we need to push farther to these areas, whether it's going up in elevation, which gets hard during harvest because you end up in the clouds, but definitely closer to that funnel, which is the Van Duzer Corridor. And listening to these other regions like the Petaluma Gap, that it's working for them. So sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead, but that was for me, it was a very an easy transition.
For sure, absolutely. Obviously, we talked a little bit before the interview about changes here this year. Radiance has some changes. Tell me about this year, what happened, and how it has affected you and your job.
Well, this year, Andrew sold Radiant to Vinnovate. And Vinnovate, it's just for people that don't know. Vinnovate is a custom crush facility in the Dundee Hills. And they have, basically they have a start to finish kind of model there where you can make the wine, you can press it there, you can buy grapes from them, whatever you want to do. And then it gets made there, and then they have a sparkling facility there as well. So they almost have a duplicate to what we have here. It's smaller, and they're doing much less wine there. But now there's an opportunity for, there's an opportunity for clients to be able to do beginning to end if they want to. But we have some parallel overlap between the two businesses. I fortunately was able to go there and spend the entire harvest on the press. So that was something that I haven't done in a couple vintages. And that's why I can speak, when I was talking about chemistry being different and sitting there at the press and tasting, I tasted everything that came through for sparkling, for white wine, for rosé, and it was different for me. It's been a couple years, and I had to calibrate and say, well, I know how to make press cuts. I know when things need to be pressed, but it was looking at the grapes coming in and looking at the chemistry after. I was like, okay, this is a little weirder than what I'm used to. But I guess to answer your question is nothing has really changed. The beauty of this merger is that Radiant is still Radiant. We're still in the same building. We're still working with our clients the way we have. There's been no mandate from Vinnovate to change the way we're doing things. In fact, they're do what you're doing. It's working really well. That is pretty much like for our clients, nothing's changing. For me, for my role, having Andrew having stepped away, I've become a lot busier. Yeah, it's been since May. It's been a lot harder for me, in a good way. The same type of thing. Somebody's turning out the lights. Somebody's cutting up the script. It's a new challenge. Yeah.
What comes next for Radiant and for you?
Well, I think that the biggest thing for me is steady as she goes. I think that what we're doing here is great. We have some new clients that we're working with, and some people. What I love is I feel like the clients that we're working with right now are really taking sparkling wine seriously. Yeah, I feel like I'm trying to think this through. I'm trying to think about what is going to change and what's different and what's going to happen for me. I don't feel like there's a huge change in place. I think for me, being like, I want to try to continue being more engaged in this community, and I think I'm just trying to figure out what that looks like. How do I continue doing what I'm doing? How can I be a resource? I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know what that looks like. But I'll tell you what, once I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Something to look forward to. You obviously talked kind of repeatedly about the importance of that, the importance of community and education to you and the work you're doing here. Tell me about, I guess, we talked sort of specifically about sparkling wine and its evolution and its growth. Tell me about Oregon wine. You've been here more or less 20 plus years with a little break in the middle there. How has Oregon wine changed? What have been the biggest sort of advances? And especially when it comes from sort of an educational, technical winemaking sense.
Well, I think that it's been a little weird for me to see. Look, I've presented so many times at so many different things, and so I have had to put together kind of a timeline of Oregon wine. And the first thing that I'd noticed, like from 1970 to 1980, 1980 to 1990, 1990 to 2000, basically Oregon kind of like doubled in size, which was no big deal for like 70 to 80, 80 to 90, 90 to 2000. And then we started seeing this catastrophic growth where it was tripling and quadrupling. So for me, looking at Oregon in that lens, is like this is a question for Oregon, right? How do we maintain this feeling of community, brand Oregon? For the first time ever the last couple years since I've been here, there's been unpicked fruit on the vines. We have a different kind of demographic as far as like who's drinking wine, what are they drinking, how are they drinking it, how do we respond to that? I feel like the biggest thing I see is great wines are being made here. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of vintage, we've had a couple of weird vintages lately, but for the most part, let's just say since 2011, there have been a lot of really easy vintages. So it's a lot of people to come into this industry and make great wines and not have the kind of vintages thrown at them that were thrown at the people that were making wines here early on. So it's allowed for this growth. But how do we as an industry, how do we as brand Oregon, how do we now talk about over 1,000 different wineries? How do we continue to be friends and neighbors and community and sharing ideas when a lot of people are hurting to sell wine? Hopefully we won't get to that place where we're trying to undercut one another just to stay alive. Hopefully we don't start to do the things that I've seen in California where we hide brand secrets. It's like, well, this is our brand secret. France is like that too. I'm not trying to blame California, by the way. France is the worst at brand secrets because they're sourcing fruit from the same block, so they don't want anybody to know what they're doing that's different than the other ones. So I think it's really important to know who we are and remember that, especially as new people that come in. I mean, you think about there's an entire generation now of winemakers that have existed since the Steamboat Pinot Noir Conference ceased to exist. When we sit down as a community and talk about wines, we have technical symposiums, but the wines have been picked. They've gone through a vetting process where they've been reviewed. They have a story behind them. I've gone and I've tasted and we're basically, it's almost like a TED Talk or a marketing ceremony. We're no longer tasting these flawed wines, or we're not learning from each other's mistakes. And I feel like, there's now an entire generation that has not experienced that. And I feel like we need to think about, as an industry, how do we continue to be who we are moving forward? Not lose sight of our identity. And I think that now that, I've seen the IP&C has disappeared, World of Pinot Noir has disappeared. Having been involved with both of them in the past, I'm like, what does that look like, right? For telling our story. We still have Oregon Pinot Camp. That's a marketing thing. It's I don't know. For me, once again, there are a lot of questions about how we maintain our identity in a changing environment. I think that what we're seeing now is a readjustment, which I think is very needed. And what will we look like on the other side of this? I don't know.
So earlier we talked about legacy, your favorite term, or whatever we want to call it, the footprint. How about that? We'll call it. Tell me about. Is there anything you haven't accomplished yet in the industry that you would like to accomplish? When you look back on that, what would you like to have included in that?
That's a good question. I think as somebody who suffers from self-esteem issues anyway, there's so many things that I would love to do in this industry. I'm going to go back to so at university, Fresno State, probably 2000, we're all sitting on the crush pad at Harvest talking about where we wanted to be. And everybody, so many people that I went to school with, we were so close to Paso Robles. It was like, I'm going to go to Paso, I'm going to make these beautiful red wines, I'm going to go to Napa, I'm going to do this. But nobody had really talked about, there's one guy that we had at school who's like, I'm going to Washington. And we're like, why would you want to go to Washington? You can make those wines here. I remember this discussion. And for me, I was the only person in that entire group that was like, I want to be a flying winemaker. And for me then, it wasn't so much about being connected with one place and one region. It was about being able to see the world of wine and to be in as many places as possible and learn from it. And I feel like, in a way, I've never been a flying winemaker. I've worked vintages in New Zealand a couple times. I've been to Michigan and back. I think for me, if I were to say the one thing that I haven't done or would like to do, would be able to do more of that. Be able to be in more places. And is that as a spokesperson for Oregon Wine? Because there's that possibility, or is that bringing the ideas that we have here to other people? I don't know. I'm full of more questions than answers. What a loser interview this is.
It's just setting up the third one is all it's doing. This is great. This is fantastic.
Dun, 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 dun.
I appreciate that you're full of questions. I think that many people are right now. There's a lot of questions, and I think that I appreciate you tackling a lot of them and looking at the bigger picture. So that's all the questions that I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't talk about that you were hoping to talk about today?
No, I think this is great. I mean, you got a train, you got these things moving in the background.
I know.
I wasn't decapitated by a microphone. I think it's a win-win scenario.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sitting down with us again today, for sharing your story, your updated story with us, and sharing this cool, amazing space with us today. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.